I updated two vital pieces of software this morning, my operating system and my OBS, and something is causing Windows to blue screen. I don't know why. So now I moved downstairs to my studio, but my studio is not set up to do audio like this. So I had to reconfigure all my audio devices, and here we are. But I believe everything should be working. This computer won't blue screen. Okay.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. All right. Where were we?
Yeah, I kind of just want to get, again, I kind of want to keep away from the politics as much as possible. I don't want to do anything with that. Specifically, what I want to talk about, again, because I'm harkening back to that, is the nature of the way that you speak, right? That's it, right?
Okay.
So your explanation for why you speak in, say, violent manner, I think we can describe this as a violent thing. You say you're doing this because you don't think you have much of an impact, and the other side is doing this as well.
Well, to be clear, I never said I don't have much of an impact. I said that I don't think we can have much of an impact on lowering the temperature. I think that for the temperature to come down, both sides have to be invested in lowering the temperature, and conservatives have shown for the past 8 years that they have absolutely no desire to lower the temperature. That's what I said.
Which conservatives specifically?
Donald Trump, the leader of the Republican Party.
So that guy and whoever you think supports him are like all in the same bucket, want to drive the temperature up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. But then don't you think that engaging, so if, of course, you want to, like, say, being or having good decorum on a platform actually has a positive effect, but you think that there's so much of a negative effect being caused at the moment that you yourself could not possibly make it any worse. Is that correct? Because that's kind of what that logic sounds like.
A little bit. I think you can probably always make things a little worse. I just don't think you can make things that much better. When you say good decorum, one of the issues we run into, I think I was talking about this before my fourth or fifth computer crash. The issue that I have with good decorum or good conversation is right now it seems like the marker for a centrist or for a neutral observer to say that a good conversation has happened here is just for nobody to shout at each other. But I think the issue that I'm running into is there are two things to look at when somebody speaks. There's the manner in which they speak, and there's the content that they speak. And I feel like we have completely disregarded all content, and we're just looking for people to speak calmly at each other, even if they're saying horrifying things. I think that conservatives have been in the business of saying horrifying things for the past 8 years, oftentimes with inflammatory rhetoric, but not always. But when they don't speak with inflammatory rhetoric and their tone is nice, they're still saying horrifying things. So I don't appreciate it when conservatives are saying, well, we need to bring down the rhetoric. I don't like that joke that you made, when they have been in the business of amplifying and causing the temperature of the conversations to increase so much over the past 8 years.
Specifically, you mean anyone who supports Trump? Because there are different conservatives across the board. The people even who don't support him, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. As a shorthand, when I say conservative right now in this context, I just mean conservative, Republican, or Trump supporter. Understanding there are some conservatives that don't support Trump, although the vast majority do, but not all. There are never Trumpers. There are conservatives that don't support Donald Trump. That is the case. But the majority of the party, you would agree right now, is absolutely lockstep behind Donald Trump, right?
I think so, perhaps, yeah.
When you say I think so and perhaps, how could it be any other way when every single lawmaker is lockstep behind Trump, when people that don't like Trump get excised from the political party, and when he enjoys broader support than almost any politician has historically in the Republican Party? What do you mean you think so?
I mean, has JD Vance been excised? He has a very interesting opinions of Trump.
Because he fell in line.
Are you sure?
Considering that he just got chosen as the vice presidential pick, and considering J.D. Vance is on record saying that he would have helped Donald Trump coup the government in 2020, yes, I am sure.
Did he say those words specifically, or did he say something that, like, what? Coup the government?
He said that he would have, where Pence failed, he said that he would have succeeded in listening to Donald Trump and rejecting the electorate vote in favor of the one that would make Trump the president, because he felt like that was an appropriate political process if they didn't feel like the results were legitimate.
Okay, yeah. But that doesn't seem like advocating for a coup. That's an if then else.
Yeah, like if you do this, then you have couped the government, correct?
Okay, cool. Again, it's funny.
Cool.
We're talking about.
So again, like this is what I don't like the nice. Or I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go do your thing. Sorry.
It's like we talk about a specific thing that is rules of engagement, and then we immediately go back to politics. It's kind of funny. I mean, I don't blame you for this. I understand that, but I don't want to talk about politics. I want to talk about rules of engagement. Again, specifically, I see there is reasoning that you want to be violent, but why not choose to be an example and not be violent, right? Because of course, you'd say here, you're having a conversation on X, for instance, and you're talking to a guy who's effectively dead. You're like basically playing with this guy's dead body, because that's what you're doing, right? You're just like quote posting his thing, and you're saying terrible things about him. Now, I'm not defending this guy, what he does or where he was at. I'm just saying that you just have some respect for the dead, right? And you don't have any respect for the dead in this regard, because you're basically interacting with what is essentially a dead person, right? This is really, really, really weird. Whatever you want to do with that, that's up to you. But that's what that is, right? Don't you think that the
I mean, who
content
better
of
to
what you
make
could
fun
say
of? That's
about this
nobody
guy,
who.
like, dude, if you have bad content with and what you have to say about this guy, doesn't that kind of go against what it is that you want? I mean, what exactly do you want? Do you want to actually have a discussion in which good content is within that discussion, even though it be peaceful, or are you just going to basically use harmful content and still have the discussion?
So this is my view. Inflammatory rhetoric accomplishes some good things and some bad things, and calm rhetoric accomplishes some good things and some bad things, right? So the reason why people are inflammatory is because it riles up your side. It makes people more emotionally invested. It produces a stronger feeling about a given thing. But typically, we don't like inflammatory rhetoric because it usually involves dehumanizing, demonizing, attacking some particular person. It increases the likelihood for everybody to engage in inflammatory acts, and inflammatory acts can put you on an escalatory pathway towards bad actions, right? Which is even more scary. But the issue is as Democrats have been as milk toast and calm, relatively speaking, when you look at Biden as possible, none of the positives that are supposed to come from calm rhetoric have been realized. And instead, it's only been the negatives. Biden has spoken over and over again about how he's not just a president for the US, or he's not just a president for one party, he's a president for the entire United States. He's brought together people to support bipartisan legislation. And at almost every opportunity, like that famous speech where he's in front of that red background, he said, listen, not all Republicans are MAGA Republicans. This isn't the entire Republican Party. Despite all of these qualifiers, despite his bipartisan support, at least in Congress, and despite him trying to be a president for all Americans, everybody on the conservative side still gives him all the negatives of the inflammatory rhetoric. So if you don't have anything to gain by engaging in a particular style of discourse, and instead you're just accruing negatives, and if you believe that the other side that is engaging in inflammatory rhetoric is allowed to recoup all the positives of that inflammatory rhetoric, why would you continue to engage in a way that's only hurting your cause, that you're not gaining any benefit from, socially or otherwise?
So if I were to kind of look at this and take that as an argument, does that mean that you want, say, Biden, for instance, to be a bit more inflammatory to kind of reap the rewards of being inflammatory against someone like Trump? Is that what you're kind of like getting towards here?
Correct. So,
Oh my
to
God,
be more precise,
more violence.
on the last. No, I didn't say violent. There's plenty of steps before violence when it comes to inflammatory rhetoric.
Okay.
So, for instance, in the last debate, I think that Biden should be making fun of Donald Trump more for being a convicted felon, for the fact that it looks like his wife is going to leave him, for the fact that, he had sex with a porn star. Like, these are things that are personal attacks that Donald Trump does all the time that rile your base up and people like them. Even if it's kind of a shitty thing to do, I would say, like, as a whole, it's shitty. Donald Trump shouldn't get to enjoy all of the advantages of that while being immune from those types of attacks. For instance, I think a lot of Democrats were pulling ads because of the recent assassination attempt. Republicans wouldn't have done that for Biden. I don't think Democrats should be pulling ads for it. But yeah, I believe that he should be engaging more in the rhetoric that Donald Trump is, because he's not getting any credit for not doing that. So why not?
Do you think he's like actually capable of that?
Yeah, it's much easier to stand up on stage and lie and do slogans than it is to try to rattle off 400 different stats and numbers that nobody cares
I
about.
mean, he kind of has done that if you want to take that position.
No, not really. He generally sticks up and he tries to be like a pretty nice dude, and he tries to, yeah, generally.
Yeah.
Do I need to define the word?
True. No, therein lies the problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What do you mean the problem? No. Well, if you're going to make the argument that every now and then he slips up or every now and then he says something problematic, again, I reject that. Donald Trump does it as a matter of habit, and Biden might do it as an exception. It's not comparable.
Okay. Yeah. So, but then what do you say? All right. This is really. It's kind of. Hang on. What's this? Now, I'm trying to check some of the responses as well, just to make sure everything is nice and balanced. This is funny. I've been posting about day 30. No, I am not Elon Musk's alt account. No, absolutely not. No. So one of the OSINT guys was like saying, hey, guess who's on with Elon Musk's alt account? No, absolutely not. I don't want that distinction. I mean, look, everyone's going to make that distinction, but I don't want that to be a thing that guides your judgment. I'm not Elon Musk. Anyways, we're going to continue. Okay, so how exactly? Okay, so you're looking at Biden as the de facto good guy here. Let's just establish that. How exactly, like, what kind of jokes specifically do you want to use against Donald Trump? Like, if you could speak to Donald Trump right now, what jokes would those be?
I think he should be. I think he should be making a lot more personal attacks relating to his character and
Okay.
relating to the record of his character.
Yeah, but but how is that of any benefit? I mean, how exactly? Okay, so cool. We have now personal attacks. Don't you think that makes you look weaker?
If it made you look weaker, then Donald Trump would be irrelevant on the political scale.
Yeah, but that's not the only thing that he does, right? He kind of like throws that in occasionally.
I would disagree. I think that's about the only thing that Donald Trump does. I don't think that there's any substance on any of his policy platform that people like him for. I don't think people can adequately describe his position on foreign or domestic affairs. He's been an epic failure in every domestic project he's tried to, herald in. So no, I think that people literally just like him because he's funny and because he insults other people.
Okay, interesting. And how exactly do you picture that going? How exactly do you picture that working out for someone, say, like Biden, who in this case has various many difficulties, of course, for instance, that he cannot distinguish whether or not his vice president is Kamala Harris or Donald J. Trump?
I'd rather have somebody that has occasional slip-ups in speech where they confuse one vice president for another, rather than somebody who has to choose an entirely new vice president because his last one wouldn't go along with his coup attempt.
Oh, no, that's not what I was saying. That's not what I was saying. What I was saying is, how exactly would he be capable of those things, say, for instance, inflammatory rhetoric, if that is one of the things that happens? Wouldn't it basically open up Pandora's box to a bunch of, say, more harmful slip-ups, if in case those slip-ups are within the context of something that's supposed to be inflammatory?
No, I think that rhetoric is much more simple to deploy. I think it's if you can rattle off stats and do whatever else and read a teleprompter, you can say simple slogans and insults. Trump has built his entire election campaign around just simple slogans. I think if Biden can do so, anybody can do simple slogans, including Biden.
Then why was Trump so effective in the debate, especially in cultivating approval within that last debate, as opposed to Biden, who arguably made also a few, maybe a few inflammatory statements or even mischaracterizations towards Trump?
I think that in the last debate, I think that Biden had a bad debate strategy. I think Biden's strategy was to rattle off a ton of numbers and try to harken back to his record. And Donald Trump was just kind of sloganeering. Donald Trump was effective because he just says things that sound good and he doesn't really speak with much substance, but that's what conservatives have come to expect. And Biden did poor because he flubbed a ton of his speech and he looked like an incompetent bumbling idiot because he was trying to rattle off like tons of numbers and stats and figures from his administration, which he should have been. He should have done more comments like the morals of an alley cat or whatever. He should have been more comments like that, calling him a convicted felon and stuff like that. That's what Donald Trump ran on. Lock her up. If you're under investigation by the FBI, you shouldn't even be able to run for president, right? These were the things that Donald Trump focused on.
Well, I mean, the problem is if you are referring to him as using alley cat tactics, don't you think that's just going to make him look cooler?
For Donald Trump?
Yes. Because you're basically taking this guy who is somewhat of an underdog already in a sense, right? He's very relatable, I think, to such people. If you took that and you now made this comparison, you basically made him more of a villain. Don't you think that would make him more relatable as well?
No.
Sure?
Donald Trump shouldn't be relatable. I think it's only because Democrats haven't engaged with him on that level. There's nothing relatable about Donald Trump. This is a billionaire real estate mogul from New York City who has a foreign wife. What is this? His third marriage? Like nothing is relatable about Donald Trump. But Democrats never hit him on any of those points. They just try to stick to policy. But I don't think that a lot of people care about policy right now, as evidenced by the fact that Donald Trump really never even talks about his policy platform. I think they just recently published one and nobody even cares about it.
I mean, look,
no, I think that they should focus more. Yeah, it makes them less relatable, I think, to focus on those things.
Interesting. Well, I mean, look, here's the thing. When you are seeing a villain in a movie that is cast in a very specific way, don't you think that villain sometimes performs better in terms of audience reception than the actual hero of the story?
I think sometimes they can be, but right now trying to be even-handed with Trump and trying to criticize, the Democrat side from the Democrats themselves it hasn't worked. This doesn't seem to be working in any way, size, shape, or form. We just recently had an insane, not to get too political, but there was recently a pretty wild immunity grant to the president that just came out from the Supreme Court, and liberals have spent far more time, probably 10 times as much time, talking about Biden's senility than they did about that Supreme Court decision. That's wild to me, and I think it shows a misfocus on the media of trying to hold themselves accountable too much when the right doesn't desire to hold themselves accountable at all.
So you're basically saying they should make up more nonsense.
I didn't say anything about making anything up.
Well, I mean,
you're
talking about accountability.
The rules of the game being played, and you've got to play by those rules.
Yeah, sure, but you're talking about accountability, right? So there's a shift in the game where dirty tactics are being deployed, and you're saying that some dirty tactics ought to be used if it helps your cause. Well, then one of those dirty tactics would, in this case, also be lying in order to confuse your enemy. Would you actually say that that's okay?
I consider lying, I think, would be immoral. I don't think making fun of somebody for things that are true is necessarily immoral. It's just maybe like not the best thing to do sometimes. But if those are the rules of the game that are being played, then those are the rules that you have to adhere to. You might think it honorable to fight with only sword and shield, but if you step into an arena where everybody has an AK-47, you can fight as honorably as you want. You're probably going to get killed pretty quickly. So I think that you have to take up, whatever the tools are being used in a particular environment you're in, and you've got to function in that environment with those tools rather than trying to hold yourself to some standard that nobody cares about and that you're not getting any credit for, that's hurting your campaign ability.
Okay.
To be center, I would never say somebody should lie. That's a tool I think that should still be reserved for the conservatives and for Trump.
Okay, cool. Yeah. About the lies. Yeah, cool. So more personal insults, less decorum.
Yeah, until I see maybe at some point, maybe if the Democrats do it, maybe the Republicans at some point were like, wait a second, hold on, maybe this isn't good. Maybe this isn't a good direction to go in. But if you have an environment set up where one side is allowed to act, aggressively the entire time and the other side isn't, then why would anybody on the side that's acting aggressively call for decorum? There's no reason to, right? You're getting away with all of it. Nobody's holding you accountable for anything, and the other side's not even responding, right? In evolutionary biology, you've got these tit-for-tat systems that show species that when you engage in a certain type of antisocial behavior, there's often a punishment for it, a tat for your tit. And if there is no tat, then those types of organisms will run rampant, and they will take over whatever social system they're in because they can attack with impunity. So I think conservatives need to understand that, well, hold on, if we're going to set the bar at this level and we're going to engage in this type of rhetoric, maybe it is going to come back and hurt us a little bit too, which tragically, if one would say, is I think what happened at that event when that guy got shot, that the Republicans have been in charge of turning the rhetoric up over and over again, denying the election results, saying that Democrats are trying to steal the country, saying they're trying to
we've heard all these
steal everything at the polls.
We know all these.
Well, they're not just talking points. They're not just talking points.
Well,
they're true.
And
when you engage in that type of behavior,
that's
fine. But when that behavior happens, it's not surprising when people get violent.
I often platform and communicate with many people who are on the left. Right. Say, for instance, when the border crisis started ramping up and there were spaces about that border crisis, everybody else was like basically grabbing their Republican best friend. I just basically brought the most left-wing guys I could find because that was in short supply. And I said, hey, let's have a conversation with these guys to actually understand what their takes are. So I kind of feel those feel somewhat like talking points because I've heard them so much. So they are kind of like talking points in a sense. But something I wanted to ask you. So given that you are saying you want to go a bit more, so, I mean, I would term this violent because this kind of is, because if you're being inflammatory, that is, by definition, I think, violent. I think there's also a certain degree of being inflammatory where it turns into hate speech, which I think is absolutely deplorable. There is a person whose name is Chase Geyser, who you recently blocked, who challenged you to a lawful duel under the Texas Penal Code 2206. And what's your response to that?
I don't have any desire to duel anybody to the death right now, so I think I didn't respond to him.
Well, I mean, I guess you want to take up a certain type of stance that equals the other side. This duel doesn't have to be to the death.
Well, I don't understand what accepting or rejecting a duel has anything to do with any of the things that I'm saying right now.
Well, you are saying that we ought to basically emulate the tactics of the other side, thereby being deflammatory in order to win, right? To win more ground. Now there's an opportunity.
I don't think that the other side is winning more ground by challenging people to duels. I don't think that's a.
Well, those are essentially duels, right? Because if you are going to be inflammatory, you're essentially engaging with a type of duel, an open duel that can be taken by another side or not. It could be taken by anyone. If I were to say, for instance, attack you or any personal element about you, then is that not necessarily a duel in a sense? Because you will have an incentive to kind of defend yourself, react to it in some way, And so you've basically therefore engaged in a duel. So I see it as basically the same thing, just different in
Well,
a
if it's
sense.
basically the same thing, then I already have accepted, and I'm dueling right now. I continue to speak. That's the manner in which I fight with people, and I do it with my voice, and I will continue to do it with my voice.
Cool, cool. But why did you block the other side then? Because you said that
Because he
it
was challenging me to a pistol shoot-off.
doesn't have to be. We can also set different rules of engagement. But still, if he wants to communicate with you, you can give
What
a
were the
reason
other?
that you don't want to do
Wait,
this. But why is your response a block? Given that you want to
because
hear
I
out the other
had
side.
no. Yeah, because he wasn't challenging me to any type. If he wanted to challenge me to a debate, then I would accept. But I'm not going to accept a boxing match or a shoot off or a pistol duel or anything else, because that's not what I'm in the business of doing.
Yeah, but still, why block? You could just say that to him. Why block?
Because I have thousands of people that are tweeting at me constantly, and if somebody says something of no value, I would rather just block them. It's quicker. I don't have the time to respond to every single deranged thing that shows up in my replies.
You could also mute certain words. Doesn't mean that you have to block that person. If you're dissatisfied with certain things that you're saying, say for instance, if I were to call you a very specific word that's constantly used, or say I'm using a particular talking point, it's almost like a copy paste, you can choose to mute that exact talking point, and you'd basically still see everything else. So why aren't you doing that, as opposed to just blocking?
When you mute somebody, do they show up underneath your
Not
replies?
muting the person, I mean muting the words / talking points, because you can actually do that.
If I mute the word or talking point, do they show up under my replies?
I don't think they do. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think you would see those.
No, I mean for other people.
For other people, I think so, yes. But if other people engage with those comments,
Then I
and if
don't.
they
Then I
talk
don't wish
about
to
it in
have
the
them.
same
I'm
way,
not.
then they wouldn't see it still.
Yeah, I'd rather just. No, I'd rather just block them. I have no desire to engage with that. I don't think they offer anything of value underneath my own tweets, so I'd rather just block those people and move on. Everybody has the ability to block on this platform. If you want to, then simply block and move on.
Well, I mean, it's not a duel to the death, though. Under penal code, it's not a duel to the death. I mean, if you want to talk to him, I can get him up right now.
If you want to, if he wants to come and have a debate, or yeah, sure, bring him up if you want.
Cool, I guess. Let me ask him. That's probably gonna take a while.
Yeah, no problem.
If it takes a while to respond, it probably means that he's communicating, saying, "Hey, can we get this set up?" Could be because it could be funny. Yeah.
Well,
that's gonna chill on itself for a little bit. Yeah, just ask him. So we'll keep this on the down low. If you could debate anyone else, who would it be? Because I kind of feel like we could also open up the space a little bit. Because I kind of feel like we've kind of reached a stalemate in a sense. I kind of think that I have an answer entirely for why exactly you would engage in, what could be defined as hate speech. Like, why do that? What's the use of this?
Well, the reason is it's like it would be like us debating, or me debating you over, do you think that solid or liquid rocket fuel is a better propellant, but saying I don't want to talk about physics. I can't really talk to you about the nature of inflammatory rhetoric if we're not able to dive into the political issues that are underlying all the rhetoric itself.
We can definitely talk about rocket fuel in the sense, right? Your kind of rocket fuel is solid here, but it also is the wrong type of rocket fuel for the rocket that you want to run. It's actually an inferior version of that same rocket fuel that I'm using right now, which is actually also liquid.
Yeah, but I disagree that it's inferior. I think it's cheaper.
Hold up. Well, cheap doesn't often equal results that are beneficial. That's another thing, right?
No, but being able to do more tests, because I have cheaper rocket fuel that allows me to test something more and more, is superior to using a liquid fueled rocket that I might have more control or efficiency over, but I have less ability to test it.
Not really, because if you're continually running the same experiment as to there's a reason why there's better rocket fuel, because you need better rocket fuel in order for the rockets to actually perform it the way that they should perform, right? So you actually want to test these rockets in a way that it makes sense. I'm pretty sure you can put the rest together, right? I don't think we have to.
I'm sure that it would make sense. To be clear, obviously liquid would be superior, but in order to really dive into that, I think we would probably have to have some knowledge, a little bit of prerequisite knowledge of some kind of physics involved. Otherwise, it'd be really hard to have that conversation. Same thing with when we talk about rhetoric. Rhetoric is not something that comes after politics or before politics. It runs parallel to it. It's part of it. The way that we express our political beliefs is done through the rhetoric that we deploy to convey our political beliefs, and to try to divorce the rhetoric from the underlying beliefs themselves is incredibly challenging. It's hard to make an argument for anything, or you could make an argument for anything if you're not talking about the underlying political issues. Yeah,
but still, it is not, hate speech is not a means by which one can duel, right? Oh, you unblocked him. Very
Hate
nice.
speech is not a what?
Cool, nice.
Oh, I unblocked him a while ago. Yeah.
Sweet.
Hate speech is not a what? Did you say?
Hate speech is not a good way of communicating anything, right? I know that you're saying, oh, we want to discuss a political issue of sorts. It is like it's basically like saying, hey, we have a launch vehicle to launch a certain thing in space. It could be literally anything, right? Like, because we're using the metaphor for rockets, I think, as everyone understands this. You can have a rocket, you can launch anything. You can launch bombs or you can launch a satellite, right? This is your choice. You've chosen to launch bombs, which I don't think is actually very conducive to any progress whatsoever. It just basically progresses things towards more of a violent path, right? Something that one should also prevent. Now, if you could look at, say, for instance, certain treaties about how to operate in space, you could look at those as rules of engagement on the platform, because there are rules of engagement, which is also kind of the enforcement of which has led to your demonetization, right? Because you basically engaged with something that could be identified as hate speech. But why do it?
Well, to be
why
clear,
do it
I
still?
think I was demonetized because I was because I engaged in a speech that Elon Musk didn't like because it
It is not
betrayed
up to
his
Elon.
political
It is not up
ideology.
to Elon. There's stringent rules. It's almost
Sure,
like
but I think he's the one that highlighted it. I've engaged with much worse commentary towards, say, Palestinians, but it seems like nobody cared about that, and I wasn't demonetized for that. And I've seen other people engage in
dude, it's just
incredibly
much
abhorrent
more.
rhetoric.
I think it's just much more public now. That's why it's been brought to massive attention. It causes a lot of damage, right?
I think my Palestinian, anti-Palestinian tweets were pretty public, but
I
regardless, I'm
guess
just saying that when you say that hate speech is not a way to communicate anything, I mean,
it's
some
not a
people
good
would
way to
disagree. It
communicate,
depends
anyways.
on
Yeah, you can communicate whatever you want via hate speech. You
it,
can launch bombs into space, but it's not a thing that you should be doing, right?
you
Why?
keep saying this, but it really depends. Even what you say there, you shouldn't launch bombs into space. To continue the analogy, should you not? You know, one of the big issues that people are having in space right now for low Earth orbit stuff is the amount of space debris there. So maybe launching bombs at debris is a superior way of dealing with
Absolutely
it than
not.
just deorbiting
Actually makes it
stuff.
worse.
More than okay,
Deorbiting stuff is
sure,
actually sending up
maybe
another
not.
vehicle and then somehow deorbiting it manually, right? If you were to actually blow stuff up, then you'd have
That's
small little fragments that travel around at the speeds which are like basically faster than a bullet, where an even a very small
sure,
object can have a
potentially. I mean,
very
it
large
depends.
impact, very destructive, and it's
I
unpredictable.
understand. Depends on
Max
how it
chaos.
depends. That's fine. Depends on how the explosion is done. Depends on the size of the thing you're
Absolutely
trying to
not.
deorbit.
No,
Depends
no.
on how you're exploding thing. Okay, potentially.
That's
But
even worse
when you talk
because
about
there's so
hate
fragments
speech,
everywhere.
whether sure, okay, I'm sure. Okay, when you talk about hate speech as a way to not communicate anything, there are lots of people that would disagree with you because they would disagree based on how you would define hate speech itself. That thing is highly contentious for a lot of people. And so some people would take an issue with the statement itself because somebody like Jordan Peterson would say, well, I should be able to call somebody the pronouns that I identify them as. And other people say, well, that's hate speech. So in that case, like who's right and who's wrong? The person telling Jordan Peterson, don't communicate this because you're using hate speech, or Jordan Peterson saying, well, even if this is hate speech, I think it communicates an important idea.
Well, but then perhaps maybe you should use a different vehicle to communicate the same idea. Essentially, right? Because if now, okay, so cool. Yeah, we're going to have that conversation. But who defines hate speech and how is hate speech defined? I think if you're basically going to hate on a person who's dead and you're doing this in a very specific way, which I think we can basically kind of look at, I'm not going to voice it because I think the way, like, I'm not going to voice it because that itself just is going to make me feel dirty. I don't like that. It's a moral problem. I have no idea how exactly you can actually bring yourself to type these things out and hit send. It's just wild. I sometimes think that I post psychopathic stuff sometimes because it kind of challenges reality, but nothing comes close to this because it doesn't really challenge reality. It just kind of makes things worse in every way. It's like a blight almost, right? You don't have to do this. You did it anyway.
You don't have to do anything. Nobody has to post anything at all. There's no obligation to do
Yeah,
anything
exactly. You simply
whatsoever.
ought not to.
So in terms of what you have to, sure. I mean, you could argue you simply ought not to engage with social media at all. It probably makes everybody's lives a little bit worse off depending upon what particular metrics
There's
you're
rules
using.
of engagement, right? There's rules of
Absolutely.
engagement. Am I going to bring? Am I going to bring an SMG to a chess game? Probably not. You just brought an
Sure,
SMG
but would
to
you
the
bring
chess
an
game.
SMG? Would you bring an no? There is no chess game being played right now. There is an SMG game being played right now. I find it hard to believe that the side that encouraged and giggled along with Donald Trump making fun of captured prisoners of war and saying I prefer the guys who weren't captured, that side has all of a sudden discovered morality and doesn't like it when people are inflammatory towards other people, be them dead or not. I just don't believe that. I think that if conservatives truly didn't like that type of inflammatory rhetoric, I think they would have policed the rhetoric on their side a little bit better rather than encouraging it nonstop.
Well, then you can also make that same exact argument and say that they're engaging with a very specific type of inflammatory speech, even though it be rhetoric in the sense, because the other side has always historically done that. That could also be an argument. And also,
Okay, then in that case, then we'll continue to do it over and over and over again, I guess, until we race to the bottom and destroy ourselves. But right now, the conservatives have shown absolutely no inclination towards pumping the brakes on any of it, and liberals pumping the brakes on it in the past doesn't seem to have helped at all. You have the most, again, milquetoast speaker in the universe is Joe Biden, who we both agree can barely string together a sentence, and we're matching his rhetoric with one of the most inflammatory presidents in recent history. So it seems like liberals trying to turn the temperature down isn't really helping much.
okay, we could kind of agree on some aspects of that. Okay, now, of course, we're still not really truly addressing the platform thing. We're kind of just edging towards that. I'm like this little thing. You know, you ever played this? You ever played this weird game where you'd like basically spin this little thing in like a bowl, and we're just kind of getting towards the center of the bowl, which is the subject, and then we just bounce back off of it. That's kind of what it feels like. But it's still an interesting game, and it's still entertaining, and children are still going to sit there for hours doing it. And that's exactly what we're doing right now.
What do you? Okay, what is the thing that you think we're not making progress towards, or what is the like? If you could express
You're just
the
saying
singular
really
idea
terrible
that you think
things about a dead person, for instance.
yeah, I think it's funny.
Why? Why would that be funny? Why would horrifying stuff be funny? And why do you think that's good?
Why? Well, why do I think it's good? Why would horrifying stuff be funny? I mean, people joke about horrifying things all the time, do they not?
It depends. Depends on the context. If it's like a horror movie and you're doing something that you have a simulated horror, which is not a real thing, we can all agree that that's not a real thing, then that's just basically making fun of a dumbass movie, right? But if you're actually talking about something that's very real, you know, do I think that we should be making fun of people who are prisoners of war? Absolutely not. I don't think it's a good thing at all. It's very bad form. War is not good. War is very ugly. And I think that people who are in war can largely agree that this kind of practice is very, very bad, given that they're actually there fighting, right? This is also why I don't think that basically rhetoric, like here on X, for instance, certain people are doing spaces and they're constantly drumming stuff up. It doesn't even matter what side it's on. It's just terrible. It's bad. It fucks things up. It makes the war worse because it actually brings then the same sense of war into people's lives that have actually nothing to do with the war, that has responses from them, and then basically you have an entirely new war that's waged in kind of like a cyberspace. I don't think that's a good thing. I think that's terrible. Right?
Okay, if we agree that these are bad things, then all sides have to play by those rules. You're in a very simple game theory environment where if one side is allowed to act with impunity and the other side isn't, then one side is going to continue to act with impunity. And right now, for some reason, liberals are held to an insane speech standard where you're not allowed to make fun of conservatives, even if they're, saying stupid shit and reaping the consequences for said stupid shit that they're saying. Whereas on the other side, it seems like liberals have to suffer an infinite amount of cultural pushback or self-censorship or whatever.
I think there's some liberals who. I think there are some liberals who are not too extreme. I'm going to talk about people who are extremely far left. Of course, there are a lot of people on the left who I agree with. Many of them are my friends. Many of them I would even trust with my life if it came down to it. Right, just to kind of put that into perspective. Right, the very far left engage with exactly what you've just described, and actually, I think are causing the most noise.
Okay. I mean, none of them are drowning out the voice of Donald Trump. How do you deal with that? You have to see the other side policing itself. There is no virtue right now. There is nothing to be gained by policing your own side's speech when the other side won't do it.
Is the center left going to say something to the far left and say, stop this shit?
Is the far left? Yes. The center left has rejected the far left over and over and over and over.
Give me an example.
What are you talking about? Give you an example. I mean, how about when Bernie Sanders was wholly rejected by the Democrat Party and a moderate one? How about when Bernie Sanders or any far left people didn't really get prominent places in Biden's administration, but rather they went to more moderate Democrats? How about when the For Justice Dems have had to moderate their position so much so that they've been disowned by the entire radical left on Twitter in order to be effective members of Congress?
So you would say that
now, can you give me a single example of any prominent Republican pushing back against any of Donald Trump's extreme rhetoric? Just one?
No, because I don't primarily focus on politics, which is why I'm asking you for examples on the left. Because I just don't know. Okay. I simply do not know.
Well, that was my example. I mean, if you look at Congress right now, there are no far left people. There are no socialists or communists like there. And the For Justice Dems, which AOC is the most popular, has moderated a ton. So much so that if you go online, these people have now been disavowed by the far left. Even Bernie Sanders has been disavowed by the far left for calling out anti-Semitism.
Interesting. Wait, that's a weird parallel to draw that I kind of don't want to put any attention on because of what you just said about anti-Semitism. I think that's a very risky thing to make a parallel of.
Well, I can't get demonetized anymore on Twitter, so I'm sorry, on X.
Jesus Christ, man. Yeah, it's not necessarily a good pursuit now, is it?
What's not?
Okay, so what is your position exactly? Where are you positioned out in the Overton window?
I mean, it depends on the particular policies that we're talking. I would be anywhere from center left to far left. It depends on if we're talking social issues or if we're talking economics.
Okay, I'm gonna. Okay, so where exactly would you then place the interaction with a dead person? Where exactly would you place that? In which category? Because you just named certain categories, and these categories are then also positions on an alignment chart. So which category does that fall under to? The
I don't
social
know if
issue?
I don't know if
What's that?
edgy humor goes into a political binary from left
That's
to
not humor,
right.
that's disturbing.
Well, I mean, jokes about the Holocaust can be disturbing, but they can also still be funny. I mean, I don't know what you want me to say.
No.
Like humor can be
No.
disturbing. Like that's
I don't think any of them are
no,
funny.
you don't think any. Really? Oh, okay. I think a lot of them are funny. I think that maybe you just don't appreciate any kind of dark humor.
I do appreciate dark humor, but I don't like to joke about war crimes.
Okay, I think those are some of the funniest jokes. But
Oh my
all right.
god. That's kind of a. I don't know. I kind of feel like it's potentially the issue here, and I think we're getting very close to that now.
So you think there are some things that should never be joked about?
I think there's some things that one should look at historically and say, like, if, for instance, if I were to take, in Germany, for instance, the swastika is, you're not supposed to use that for anything. Think about it that way. If you now make a joke about it and you put it everywhere, that's a problem, right? Something like that, perhaps.
I'm not Germany. So just to be clear,
I'm using
and I'm
an
not trying to
example.
attack any Europeans. No, I understand, but as an example, I would disagree with that. I'm an American. I enjoy our First Amendment protections for free speech. I would disagree with any law that tries to make drawing a swastika or making a Hitler salute illegal. I think that in the United States, we should enjoy the freedom to express those things.
So, but if I were to put this more directly, if there was a KKK group and they were expressing themselves, you'd be fine with that.
When
Expressing
you say
themselves
be
specifically,
fine
say,
with that,
let's imagine, because
well, hold on, wait, just real quick. You got to define when you say be fine with that. What do you mean? Like, I wouldn't be fine with that. I think there would be abhorrent beliefs. But do I think that like the police should crack down on it? No. Do I think they should be banned from social media platforms? Generally, no. It depends on the type of behavior you engage in. If it's like targeted harassment or doxing or something else, then maybe not. Or maybe you should be. But I mean, yeah, it depends on what you mean when you say be fine with it.
okay, yeah, something along those lines. So you'd basically tolerate it to a certain extent. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, yeah, and for the way that the United States works, there's some level of discourse, there's some groups of beliefs that you would find abhorrent that you would necessarily have to be able to function with because that's kind of how the United States works. We have a diversity of opinion here.
Okay. So within that, so by basically within that same within that same sphere, you think it's then also okay to joke about a person who's dead? What if I were to make fun?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so what if I were to make fun of you after you've passed? I'd make a lot of jokes about you, turn it into a massive trend. How would you feel about that?
Well, I'd be dead. So you don't think that when I travel, you don't think I joke about that myself constantly? I just took a trip to Israel, and I know that there are a ton of people that were rooting for me to be killed by either side. If I got killed by an IDF soldier, yeah, every lefty on the internet would be blowing up and making fun of me. If I got killed by a Palestinian, every right-leaning person would make fun of me. Yeah, I mean, this is what happens, of course.
Okay. Why do you think that is? Because like, well, what exactly is your position? Like, okay, let's take a little further. What is, I'm sorry, what is your actual goal? Like with all of this or what you're doing? You're like streaming every single day, I think. You're causing lots of drama. What's your actual goal? Like, where do you see this going in, say, 10 years? What's the impact that you want to have?
I don't know where. I mean, who knows? 10 years is a long time. By then, maybe AI will have destroyed us all. In terms of what my goal is to just communicate a political message that I think is true and righteous to as many people as possible in as convincing a manner as possible. That's my goal.
And you somehow think that making fun of a dead person aids in that or is part of that?
Well, more people are watching me right now as a result of said rhetoric than they were 3 days ago when I wasn't. So, I mean, to some extent, I can argue right now that, well, it actually seems like it demonstrably has paid off in numbers. In other ways, I would look at my performance over the past 6 or 7 months, where I think I've had more penetration into mainstream-ish media than I ever had before, but I'm not happy with those conversations. I don't think those were that good. So when I look at the lukewarm conversations or the milquetoast conversations that I had with Jordan Peterson, with Ben Shapiro, with these types of figures, and then I look at the arguments that I made, I would say, well, actually, I don't know if I represented my side too well because it's just a bunch of centrists coming together and going like, wow, what a nice conversation, but not actually seriously considering any of the ideas being presented, just being happy that both sides were calmly speaking to each other.
Okay, but you could think of it this way, but generally, I think with a lot of political rhetoric, the reason why a lot of people engage with you is actually for the drama itself. It's not actually that you're fostering a positive message. I don't believe that that is actually occurring. You may think that is occurring. I'm not sure if that is what you think you're doing, but I don't see that that's happening. Right? I actually see the only reason why anyone would engage with you is the same reason that people have engaged with various other people who have attempted to do the same thing, for the purposes of just basically seeing drama, right? Because it's essentially what you've defined for me when you said, hey, I've made a negative joke about somebody, and that has positively reflected on my reach, then basically that's just the textbook definition of clout chasing.
You can call it cloud chasing if you
That's what it
want,
is.
but I mean well, I mean, in a way, every single thing you do as somebody that survives off of the attention from other people is clout chasing. Every single thing Donald Trump does, every single thing every single influencer does is clout chasing to some extent. We're all trying to market ourselves and get more eyes on
But
us.
there are
I mean,
lines. Some
the
are
goal.
prostitutes on
Yeah, sure. Let me finish
OnlyFans.
real
Yeah,
quick.
let him
That's
finish. Let
great.
him finish. Let him
That's
finish.
great.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, just real quick.
Yeah,
Yeah. So like you can argue that I engage with drama to bait some viewers in, and yeah, for sure, I absolutely do. I do a wide type of content on my stream, and some of it is drama related. But once I have people here, I'm more well read in almost any of the issues that I talk about than basically any other pundit right now in media that's talking about these things. So when I have conversations about vaccines, or when I have conversations about Palestine and Israel, or when I have conversations about the Supreme Court cases, I'd rather catch some people with drama and keep them around while we read the entire opinion, rather than have people go watch somebody else for drama and then survive off of Twitter headlines. So you catch more flies with honey, I believe is what they say, right?
yeah, but I think your main goal here should not be to catch flies, so to speak, in a sense, right? Like there's a problem that I have with that specific aim, right? You can gain an audience through drama like this, and it's amazing, right? It's a huge growth trajectory, but it's just not something that is sustainable, and it's also not something that is positive in any manner, right? So basically, your argument here is that you engage with this that is actually negative in order to gain the attention that is needed to spread what you think at the end of the day is a positive message. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I appreciate your feedback. Well, no, I don't. And that I don't respect it or regard it. I would consider that, if anything, I would say I'm probably a subject matter expert on internet relevancy at this point, probably more so than almost anyone else on the planet, given that I've done this for 15 years. I think
Sure.
I know what works. I think I know what doesn't work. I think I've seen a lot of things that work. I've seen a lot of things that don't work. Yeah, and random comments about how, well, this is going to be the thing that destroys you and blah, 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 like generally come from people that don't have a good understanding of the space.
No, I'm not going to say that this is the thing that's going to destroy you. I'm not actually saying anything about your destruction. I'm just basically trying to ascertain exactly where your position is at for myself personally, and in doing so, also giving other people that understanding. That is my perspective. That is also kind of my purpose on this platform, right? It's also why I talk to certain people. Like initially, it's not a good idea to actually talk to you, right? But I still make this conversation happen because I want to have this conversation, because I have a specific thing that I want to push, right? An understanding of this specific instance, because a lot of that's the only reason I actually heard about you. Up until about, I think, a month ago, I have not heard about you. Somebody randomly brought you up. I watched a 30-second clip about you, and then I forgot you again. And then this thing came up again. So perhaps, of course, there is a method to your madness in the sense in that you have attained an additional audience. But in a sense, I don't think that's really good, because what you're pushing here is not actually a positive message. I would say it's just about as bad as all the other weird memes, like the plane freak out and the Hawk Chua meme, where basically you're just saying, hey, if you do these kind of weird things as a human being, then you'll be successful because you get the max amount of clout.
Well, in order to have that conversation, we would have to engage on substance, but you said you've wanted to avoid political conversation, so there's not really much
That is substance.
headway
That
that
is
either of us can
substance.
make into
You
that.
don't even need to use politics for this.
Rhetoric is not substance. Rhetoric is not substance to me. These are things that I engage in, and it draws eyes to my content. And then once you have their eyes on my content, then I engage in substantive conversation or research or analysis.
Yeah, but the way that
I
you've
mean,
just worded that is substantive in a way, right? It's a
no,
concept.
that's like procedural. That's not substance. It's procedure, right? These are the things that I do. Now, what we
Okay.
do with those things that we do, how we take apart things using these procedures is the substance, in my opinion.
I'm basically saying, here is a box with the potential for something. It's like Schrodinger's cat, but imagine it's a box for a concept, right? It's like a zero. Nobody can actually grasp the concept of what a zero is, because it's truly nothing. And the very existence of nothing is not possible. Thereby, it's nothing. So you have to actually put a box around a nothing for nothing to truly exist within our brain space. So it's actually a thing now. So we're going to talk about rhetoric as if it was a box, right? There is no rhetoric within this box, but it's a box that is always used to deliver rhetoric. Now, where exactly you are going to send this box depends upon you. I just don't think that that type of box needs to be sent to someone who has passed away.
That's fine, but to divorce the rhetoric from what's being said is incredibly difficult. The way that I would speak to, like a partner's parent, or the way that is going to be different than the way that I would speak to a child, which is going to be different than the way that I would speak to a police officer who's pulled me over, is going to be different than the way that I would speak to somebody on a social media. Like all of these things are going to be different. It's impossible really to divorce rhetoric from what's actually being said, when rhetoric is just the expression of a thing being said. It's like trying to analyze, phenotype without genotype, or trying to analyze, I don't know, like any two things that are required for each thing to exist and express the other thing. I don't know how you can analyze rhetoric and to find out if rhetoric is good or not, or particular rhetoric is good or bad or not, without getting into the substance of what's being said.
More like where it is applied. Okay. So let's say, for instance, we have to, again, these are different types of boxes. So there's something really toxic. There's the box that we don't actually ever want to pull out because it contains something really fucked up, right? Let's say, for instance, the types of rhetoric that you've engaged in when referring to, say, that person, right? You've chosen a very specific type of rhetoric. You've chosen to deliver a very particular box. You've not just like taken the generalized concept of rhetoric itself as a whole box. You've just taken a very specific quality of that box, and you've decided to send it there, even though this thing should not even be sent in the first place. Much like a nuke. You basically chose to nuke a dead guy.
Well, can you give me? Well, I mean, I feel like a nuke is a bad example, because
That's
have there
actually a
not
good
been
example.
times historically where we've decided that we do need to nuke somebody?
It's
or
a
do you think that, like,
decimation.
the nukes
Well, it's a conceptual nuke, so you can keep using it. And you have used it.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying, like, do you think that in the non-conceptual sense, in the very real sense, was like nuking
technical
Japan a bad decision?
Yeah.
What are we
think
talking
so.
about? He
Isn't
said
that a bad thing? Is that
a
genocide?
grown man protecting his family
Okay.
needed to die.
If we,
and anybody who supports Trump deserves to die.
Prodigal. Hold up a second. We're gonna get into this. I want
Nice.
hold you cool for a second. Hold you cool for a second. Just a second. Okay.
When you say
I think genociding a bunch of people is probably not the best thing. Like, say, for instance, the case of Japan. Do you think it was good to kill all these innocent people that had nothing to do with any of the conflict and just happened to exist in the wrong place at the wrong time? Because I think by all intents and purposes that was the case. And also, even the fact that a lot of their major cities were burnt down with napalm before any of the nukes even landed first. Do you think that was a good thing?
I don't think that there were a bunch of people who had nothing to do with the conflict. I think that all of Japan's population was poised to engage in total war. I think that the entirety of the population was literally ready to fight, hand and tooth over the potential invasion of the American army. I don't think you had an entire population.
So that's how you justify that.
Surrender. You had
I think the majority of people tend to want to avoid war, because when it actually comes down to it, people are forced to go to war as opposed to doing it willingly, unless, of course, you brainwash them into that.
Then how did the emperor maintain his legitimacy despite the fact that Japan had been engaged in war for some 10 years? What do you mean? The people were all there for war. They were ready to fight. They believed in the spirit of their emperor and their people, and they wanted to follow the war through to the end.
Or they didn't want to somehow dethrone the emperor because that is not a good thing to do within the time of war. Or perhaps you don't want to do that in the first place because none of the civilians were actually wanting conflict at all. Because I don't think anyone truly desires conflict within a stable life. I'm pretty sure that the average family that was just trying to get by, who was like an office worker at the time, who then got subsequently nuked, had a desire for conflict.
I think you should read into the ideas and desires of the people that existed in Japan.
This was
World
war
War II
propaganda that was brought forth even by the country itself in order to kind of affirm a certain idea to the enemy, which was the United States at the time. This doesn't mean that it represents the opinions or the feelings of the entire populace. That just means that the war propaganda was very effective at signaling exactly this concept to the enemies, which was then, of course, used as a justification to then eventually nuke them, I believe, within your context of what you're saying. Doesn't mean it's a good thing, though.
I've never heard that argument ever in my entire life. I mean, if that was the case, then I would agree with you.
Do you want to go to war?
Anybody's ever seriously put forth? Do I want to go to war? I mean, it would depend on the war.
No, just in general. If in any war, if there was any war, and you would just be there, anything, it doesn't matter what the war is.
Wait, that
even
would
if
be
it's
like
a losing war,
me, like,
would you still engage with it?
You can't answer that question
yes, you
without
can.
context.
The context is the war exists. It doesn't matter what that war is. If you are forced to fight, will you?
It does matter what that war is. Because the answer that I would give would greatly depend upon the war itself, of course.
No, because that is still the thing. If you're like, say, I'm trying to basically speak from the perspective of a person, say in Japan, who's just living their life. And let's imagine that you are that person as well. If you were made to go to war, would you do it?
If I believed at the time that my people were superior and that we needed to, dominate the continent next to us and that we needed to fight to secure our position in the world and be the leaders of the world, maybe, yeah, I would want to go to war, I guess.
Okay, yeah. Well, therein actually kind of highlights your existing position, because you are that type of person who's already ready for conflict, kind of wants to engage with that to a certain extent, but only if you say that there is a winning position to make, which is kind of interesting, because I think that kind of reflects the arguments chosen, which is also the reflection of politics.
I don't understand what any of that means. It's like asking somebody, like,
It's
would
like,
you ever want to kill a dog?
basically what I'm saying is, you don't want to argue about the
I would ever want to kill a dog, but if a dog was attacking me, trying to kill me, then I probably would kill the dog. I mean, it depends on the circumstances, of course.
Yeah, cool. No, basically what I'm discovering, no, sorry, what I'm discussing here is basically there is a box, and we're talking about boxes in a certain extent because we are looking at concepts, not just with substance within them. And you're basically saying, I don't want to argue with boxes, I want to argue with the contents, right? Because that's the only way that you can win.
No.
So basically that is like
no,
the distillation, that is like the distillation of how you would go to war. If you'd said, hey, for instance, if I have to dominate a neighboring continent, and I was convinced that we could actually win this war, then I would go to war. But what if that was not the case? Would you then also still go to war? Like, what if it's a hopeless war?
When you ask me, when you ask me if I want, it depends on the war. It depends on what you're fighting for.
You're fighting for a country, and you'd probably want to get more territory. Let's set that as a precedent. I think that was exactly also what happened. So if you were to take that context specifically, and you knew it was a losing war, would you still fight?
If I was in the United States and it was an aggressive
no.
war,
I'm talking about Japan specifically, because you're basically making an excuse for why these people are being nuked, because that's what that was essentially.
I wasn't making that. I wasn't saying that the people. I was challenging your idea that the people were just innocent civilians that were idly wandering by.
Yeah,
and they
most of those were
collateral damage from bombs. They
the
weren't.
People in the army were the ones who were actually fighting, and the people who were living inside of the city were the ones who were living inside of the city. They're innocent civilians. They didn't
have enough weapons and uniforms for the people that wanted to volunteer to fight. Most of the Japanese citizens were poised and ready to fight.
So you need somebody to actually make stuff, but sure. You're looking at this from
that's fine.
You're looking at this not from the perspective.
For the concept of total war, if you want to apply that to a country, Japan was like the best example of a total war country, where every single member of that society was essentially ready to fight to the death against the incoming American invaders. They were poised and ready to fight.
Conceptually, you cannot guarantee that, though. These are still innocent civilians. They didn't want to fight. It was still bombed to shit regardless.
Guarantee it, but then the question is, do you run that gamble with 1 million of your own citizens, with 1 million of your own soldiers? Do you run that gamble, that lottery, and hope that, well, maybe once we invade, maybe they'll all back off and just kind of chill?
No, you're still going to use government propaganda, of course. Doesn't mean that reflects reality. It is still going to, and then your enemies are going to use that as an excuse to basically bomb the shit out of you, which is exactly what happened.
Should the Americans, so then should America have done a ground invasion then?
No, of course not. I don't think there should have been any invasion at all. There should have probably been a defense of certain territories, but I think that perhaps the nuking of innocent civilians, which is exactly what that was a bad thing to do, wasn't it? It set a lot of fear into everyone, and also, I think, led to a lot of damages, where, for instance, nuclear technology would probably be would probably still be here in many different ways, where, say for instance, we're still using like fossil fuels to power our cities in some areas. That's terrible, right? We'd actually want to have more nuclear power as opposed to less of it. And then something like this impact, us using, the understanding of nuclear power as a weapon, actually made this specific way of generating power a negative thing. That is bad. It has actually kind of contributed to a very bad impact.
I mean, that is a hypothetical argument that you could make.
I mean, it's like basically it was used as an argument to basically shut down all the power plants at the time.
You can say that, but you can also make the argument that one of the biggest reasons why nuclear proliferation is something to be avoided around the world is because people saw how destructive nuclear weapons were in World War II, that seeing 2 cities nuked so immediately and so entirely by singular bombs, of which we're still very primitive in making, is one of the things that led the entire world to come around and say, wow, we probably really need to stop countries from gathering nuclear weapons.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe we should make NATO, maybe we should have nuclear umbrella, but this wouldn't have happened if people wouldn't have seen the destructive power of those nuclear weapons. Japan didn't even really believe the first one would go off. The Soviets didn't know how strong they would be, and once they saw the first one and they saw the Soviets advance, they're like,
well, shoot, okay, maybe. The Tsar bomber, which is like the biggest explosion ever.
Just understand.
Sure.
Okay, hang on a second. Before Protocol starts going off.
Nobody's seen these bombs tested. Sure. Nobody's seen these bombs tested on cities before. Nobody knew if these would be as effective in combat as they could have been, right? Even though the Soviets did have their own nuclear program and the Germans were pursuing those. I'm just saying that without seeing them in action, without seeing cities destroyed, without seeing 40, 60, 50, whatever, 80,000 people
what do you
vaporized,
think they tested it on?
The world might not have had. They didn't. Did you think they tested them?
It actually, I mean, one of the things that were actually tested on model cities was in fact napalm, which was then also subsequently used as well. And the nukes were just a way to finish it. But besides that, we're going to get to.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Wait. What was the highest amount of civilians killed in a nuclear bombing besides Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
and a nuclear bombing. Those two are...
Exactly. So the world's seeing these two cities. Just everybody
You didn't
knows,
have to have a massive loss of life in order to understand how dangerous it was. If you didn't have an understanding of how dangerous it was, then maybe it wouldn't have been dropped in the first place.
You have no idea if that's true. That's just you. That's you assuming that.
No, it's not. If you see the Tsar bomber basically leveling all kinds of shit, and you basically say, here, for instance, my pilots over here have a 50% chance of survival because that's how strong the fucking bomb is, I think that's an understanding. Even the same thing with all the tests in Nevada at the time. You think that nobody understood how powerful these things were?
How many people do you think know what the Tsar bomb is?
A lot of people. I think almost everyone.
Okay, I can't.
Should I put a vote out? How many people know what it doesn't matter. Anyways, Prodigal. So I kind of want to shift to
in the United States, it's probably less than like 5 or 10% of people have ever even heard that term before. That'd be my guess.
Tsar bomb. Are you sure? Because everybody's like talking about nuclear this or nuclear that. Everybody knows what Terminator is, and everybody knows what Terminator is. Everybody knows what nukes are, and if everybody knows what nukes are, then everybody knows what the Tsar bomb is, because that's the biggest baddest of all the nukes.
Okay, I would guess 5 to 10% of the population.
Okay, perhaps.